A wise teacher was asked, "When will the pandemic end?" The teacher replied, "When we no longer need it." 2020 was key to that collapse, which I saw as a spiritual collapse. Whether we could actually see what was happening or not, we underwent a major spiritual transformation after experiencing a spiritual collapse.
Did you literally mention that we forget our true nature once we incarnate? What is our true nature? Why do we reincarnate? How do you get out of that cycle? How does that cycle work?
Our soul does not belong to this world. Kabbalah teaches it comes from another dimension called Gan Eden, or the Garden of Eden, which isn't a garden but another realm. A German scientist, already a disciple of Freud, died. He discovered how to manipulate the ether to generate rain and developed a machine called the Cloudbuster. But it's a machine to develop clouds and to destroy clouds, that is, to create rain and also to make the rain disappear.
Who has taken over God in the modern world? That has some clear purposes of satanic Illuminati. In the Talmud, the figure of Christ is something to be brought down. Christ is the enemy. To the people of Israel or to the Jews? After Europe converted to Christianity, they were expelled from over 109 countries. To what extent? Don't they have a supremacist philosophy of life regarding God? Good day, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Ele Factoria. I have the great pleasure of interviewing the guest who got the most views. But for me, that's not what's important. For me, it's the knowledge he has shared here on this show. Welcome, Raúl. How are you?
Thank you very much, Jota. Glad to be here. Well, I'm very well, very happy for your invitation, and very honored by the interest it has generated. All topics from the last podcast. Thank you.
Yes, I'm going to provide the audience with some context on how we've organized this second program. And don't think it was like, wow, did it get views? Should I write to him? No, it wasn't even getting any. It was the second day that I watched the program at home and I said, wait, there are a lot of things I still have left to say. To talk with Raúl Justo, once we agreed, we said, let's organize the program. And then it started to take off and I told you, damn, Raúl is hitting it big. This program is quite interesting, but it's not because of the views. It's more because there are some very controversial topics and some really interesting topics that we didn't get to cover. First, I want to discuss this topic, since we'll save the main points for later. It's the topic you've discussed on social media, humanity's spiritual collapse. How do we define that concept? What causes it?
Well, in Kabbalah, there is a concept called Tikkun Olam. Tikkun means rectification, Olam means the world, so it means the rectification of the world. When the soul incarnates in this world, in the physical body, it completely loses the memory of its true nature. By doing so, it begins to be dominated by the passions of the body, by ignorance, and then it starts to make short circuits and to be clumsy. Let's say it lacks the knowledge, which leads to even more things to fix, right? How? In addition to the previous ones, it already carried to be reincarnated. There are two processes, the individual process called tikkun, which means rectification, and another process. And then there is what is human activity. Admiration. Spiritual collapse. Why? Because we're in a moment, right there. The year 2020 was fundamental for that great collapse, which for me was indeed a spiritual collapse, in which the forces of evil, which, as we've already seen, play a fundamental role in our training as souls, hit the bullseye absolutely to, let's say, bring us down. Many, but not all. But many of the layers of the ego, with the ego being necessary to be in this world, but many of the layers that the ego has, of rigid structures, of very rigid ways of seeing life. And he invited us to see reality in a very different way, many of us, myself included. Regardless of whether we could really see what was happening or not, what is true is that we went through a tremendous transformation on a spiritual level because we experienced a collapse on a spiritual level. Because those social, economic, belief, psychological manipulation, and psychological structures collapse before our eyes. In others, and many times in ourselves as well. in such a way that it was a very important turning point which allows us to rebuild ourselves as human beings from a much more interesting perspective. So, the spiritual collapse of humanity is very important because it allows you to rebuild yourself on an individual level. As a human being in Kabbalah, we say Adam, but Adam doesn't mean the first man Adam. Rather, in Kabbalah, it means the highest level of consciousness that a human being can aspire to. That's what Adam means in Kabbalah. That is like the top of the potential you can aspire to in terms of consciousness level. Reaching that level of consciousness always requires experiencing destruction or collapse. In Tarot, the Tower card symbolizes destruction when towers fall. Here, many beliefs have been destroyed and continue to be destroyed. Inner strengths that we thought were real strengths, but it turns out they were built on shaky ground. The forces of evil make us see this. And we have to be smart enough to adapt and rebuild ourselves from within with much stronger foundations. Considering that all those kinds of events we experienced in 2020 can happen, no one expected something like that. And all of that will ultimately make us, far from weaker, much stronger. And that we have much more depth in the analysis we can make of the events that happen to us in our lives. They are real challenges every day. Challenges with your partner, with friends, with parents, with children. If we are stronger, we can face it more solidly. So, to wrap up my answer, I would say that the spiritual collapse of humanity is a fact. But from that, we move on to a much greater and much more powerful level of consciousness, which makes us have much stronger spiritual pillars.
I understand, Raúl. So to summarize, this is the idea you just gave me. Correct me if I'm wrong. If maybe I haven't interpreted something correctly or I haven't understood something well. Do you mean that this spiritual collapse largely has a more massive origin, or that it affected the macro environment more in 2020 because many structures that were used in the past or historically have always been used to subdue the population, to keep them deceived, to keep them within a pen? They fell for those who were
Open to seeing it? Exactly. And it's very interesting that in the end, the main tool of psychological manipulation is fear. That's how it's always been and will always be. But what's curious in this case is that, let's say the people, the number, many people realized this didn't make sense. Well, these people who realized it were really amazed. And they also collapsed. Especially these people collapsed on a spiritual level in disbelief at what they were seeing, at how the rest of the people were reacting. I don't know if I'm making myself clear.
totally. I'm one of those people.
And I'm another one. I broke down. Yes, I did.
Me too. I broke down right there. I did. That's when I realized that in this world, we're playing a much darker game than people could ever even imagine. But speaking of 2020, I wasn't prepared for this, but it just came up. How does Raúl Durán, an expert in Kabbalah, relate to the events that happened that year with spiritual matters?
It has a very direct relationship because in Kabbalah, there's a concept called Mashiach, Messiah. Mashiach in Hebrew. In the last podcast, I explained that a Kabbalistic tool is permuting letters in a word to achieve leaps in consciousness as the word gains new meanings. So, Mashiach, you can read it by permuting the letters as Yesh Moash. In Hebrew, it means there is brain, there is understanding. That is Mashiach. In other words, have you understood? Have you realized something very powerful that has taken you to another level of consciousness? What does it take to reach the Mashiach level, or Messiah, your own inner Messiah? Well, you need an equivalent, but on the negative side. Interestingly, we're now going to use a Kabbalistic mechanism called gematria. The numerical value of the word Mashiach is 358 in the word's numeration. There's another word, which is Nahash. Nahash means serpent, the one from paradise mentioned in Genesis. The bad side, Sitra Akra, the other side, and the perverse side all share the same gematria. It means that both need each other. Because the Nahash, which is the reptilian brain in us, which directs survival and is implanted there by the force of evil, to press a button and make us fear. It has the motivation and it has the obligation and the goal to do that. What? For what? To make it jump. May your inner Mashiach make you stronger, make you more resistant, make you more resilient, make you... Spiritually, it's much higher, which is where we connect with Adam. When the time comes when you no longer need it, of events that are harsh blows of life, then you will be reaching a level, Adam. That is, you don't necessarily have to go through suffering or hard blows in life to grow spiritually. However, it's obvious and evident that in most cases, that's how it is. Why? Because we live in a constant carnival. The carnival never stops. There are so many distractions. And since we live in a constant carnival and there are so many distractions, we don't stop to review our own internal process of consciousness growth. When we do so, it's only because we've taken a serious hit. And that review doesn't last long because it immediately continues like a carnival. Something else catches your attention. And we have to have enough spiritual strength not to fall into the distraction of the carnival. Yes, the carnival is very nice. The carnival is there. We have to be able to see the masks and who is behind those masks. We even have to be able to see our own mask. Our mask, our character, our essence. How far is the mask from the essence? Which is often a lot. And when it's a lot, then we have to encourage a closer connection. To be able to reach a balance, we have to walk toward our essence. That's the spiritual collapse of humanity I mentioned earlier. And it's the process of rectification. We need the mask, we need the ego, but it has to be very close to the essence. And that is our work in this world.
I understand, Raúl. But then, going back to the topic of the events of 2020, I'm still not quite clear about the idea. All of that happened. And what was the intention behind it from your perspective? What was the intention? Because as far as I understand, and I insist, correct me if I've misunderstood something or if I'm wrong. All of that, did it serve a positive purpose in the end? But a lot of people have suffered extremely dire consequences. There's something about the whole argument you just made that I can't quite grasp. I don't know if you understand me, Adia.
I don't know if you're getting me. What you're trying to tell me is that how is it possible that it has a positive purpose when there have been people left with physical after effects because of it?
Multimillionaires, a bunch of people.
Who have become multimillionaires, etc.
Much pain, suffering, and deception. Many haven't been able to say goodbye to their
relatives, parents.
Deceased. That is, I understand the concept because I have experienced it myself, that it had a positive side for those who were able to see behind the lie, but not that the ultimate purpose of that deception was positive.
That's where I got lost, yes. There's a very interesting concept here, and it's that deception is Satan's fundamental weapon. He operates through deception. Remember, in the Christian Gospels, for example, a very famous passage is when Satan tries to tempt Jesus in the desert and offers him a lot of things. To own the world, do you recall the passage? No? Etc. What happens? People who have sold themselves for a bowl of lentils, they enter into a dynamic that is legitimate, that is perfectly feasible, and it's a path that's neither better nor worse. On a spiritual growth level, obviously, it leads them to have to reincarnate again. Those who left this world, or if they still haven't learned the lesson, specifically this lesson, will lead them to return to this world. But those who, let's say, chose another path of resistance, of not believing in the official narrative, and above all, very importantly, that an internal process of self-reflection was encouraged in them. For me, this is fundamental. That's its purpose. This group of people are the ones who are called to be the beacon of humanity. In Hebrew, it's called Or Lagoim, light for the nations. What does light for the nations mean? To be the example, to be the motivation, and to be the strength. That many people need to keep going day by day, supporting each other, because many times daily life is not easy and you need support. And the events of 2020 were not positive events. But since creation itself is affirmative, it's a creation, it's an affirmation. Therefore, in the end, we have to. If you don't accept what the Creator presents to you, the Creator's accounting. If you doubt the Creator's accounting, you're lost. Accept what the Creator offers and integrate with it, as this helps you face your shadows, fears, insecurities, and indecisions. It's not an easy process, it's a painful process, but it's a process that takes you to a spectacular level of spiritual transformation on a personal level. If many people do this personally, we achieve Tikkun Olam, the world's global rectification. We need that collapse, and that collapse has come because it's necessary to end the movie on one level and move on to another level. We are already moving on to another level. We are moving to the level of the cosmic Shabbat, where consciousness is of another quality, it's of another dimension, it's of another color. Events are seen in a different way. Your wisdom invites you to interpret events in a different way. Where before you saw darkness, now you might see a hint of light, because neither darkness is all darkness, nor is light all light. So, in the dual world, everything has a bit of everything. Look, there's a very interesting analogy. For example, everyone has both female and male hormones, regardless of gender. And what is above is below. I mean, we have similarities in all fields of matter. In Kabbalah, it's called Malchut, the physical world. First, accept. Second, appreciate the lesson. Third, act accordingly. And here is the part that, for me, is fundamental. When you have already integrated that, when you have already gone through that process of pain, now you have to decide, what do you do? Because you have to decide. So, looking back at 2020, some chose one thing while others chose differently. Some decided not to wear a mask, others decided to wear a mask. Some decided not to get vaccinated, others decided to get vaccinated. Under threats of being fired, under all kinds of threats, under the threat and sometimes even the real consequence of being ostracized, even by family. Yes, but they had to make a decision. That's right. And that's the point where transformation happens. It's a tough moment, and
There are no right or wrong decisions. Raúl, there are no positive or negative decisions. There is no absolute good or evil. And that's the point. I, as a Catholic, do believe that there is good and there is evil, and good and evil are not determined by the outcomes of certain actions. It's absolute.
thank you. There is no absolute good or absolute evil in this dual physical plane because it is a dual plane. Absolute good exists, but only on higher planes beyond our understanding. Absolute good exists, but not here. In this plane, we can indeed attract that absolute good or part of that absolute good through ourselves. Or channel it, so to speak. Absolute evil exists, but not in this plane, because this plane is dual by definition. Nothing is absolute, not good or evil. So that which looks... I had a teacher who always used to tell me that. When I told him that I wanted to do good for someone and explained why I wanted to do good for that person, he would say, yes, but that's your good. Maybe it's not good for him. Do you understand?
Yes, I understand.
That's where the relativity of duality comes in. It's interesting, as each soul has its own path and choices. We have to respect the destiny of each soul, even if it hurts us. Even if it hurts us, we have to respect the destiny of each soul. We cannot interfere with anyone's destiny. For example, you have a podcast where you do a broadcast and people either watch you or they don't. But it's the people's choice. You're not forcing anyone to watch you. You don't put a gun to their chest. And yet, there are many people who choose to watch you, right? But it's through a process of personal choice. It's a process of personal review. They're interested in what you can offer, but you don't force them. You don't impose. And if they don't like it, they change the channel. Thank you. This is what I mean. Ultimately, it's a deep and powerful internal process. Does it shake and flip you 300 times? And well, even though it might seem a bit masochistic, it's also part of the charm of this world, because the charm of this world is that we're in training. We spoke with the sound crew off camera. I don't know if you remember, from the word amen in Hebrew. Amen means so be it. And amen comes from amen, which is 3 Hebrew letters, which is a root that forms words. And the words that are formed from the word amen are emunah, which means faith. That is, when you have total and absolute emunah here in this world, faith, then you say amen, so be it, and it is decreed. And also from the same root comes the word imun, which means training. It's curious, isn't it? The root, aleph, mem, nun, which are the 3 letters of amen, is that same root used to build different words? Emunah, faith, imun. Training. Trust that you're in training even if you doubt it or lost your memory upon arriving. Have faith that what you're doing is training. Accept reality before deciding. Change yourself. Don't try to convert or change others. Focus on personal responsibility and self-transformation. People who want to listen to you will do so naturally. They'll come, and trust me, they'll listen. Many people already do. But that's the positive side. Because that's the difference between authority and power. They're distinct concepts. Authority comes from your example, from your inner energy, from your strength. People will listen to you. Power means having material control, like economic influence or the ability to enforce things. They are 2 different concepts, so authority is much more interesting because it comes from your center and from your conviction, from your internal coherence, with no intention to convince, with no intention to please, with no intention to be accepted. You don't need anyone to validate you from the outside. You need to validate yourself in connection with the Creator. Always.
I find the concepts of authoritas and potestas incredible. I want to ask you a question. The topic of reincarnation, we barely got to touch on it in the previous show because I didn't ask you. Where do you get it from? That we have a memory? Explain the whole concept to me because I don't quite understand it, right? Melezzo? You literally mentioned that we forget our true nature once we incarnate? What is our true nature? Why do we reincarnate? How do you get out of that cycle? How does that cycle work? I find this topic interesting and would like to hear your perspective.
Look, Sha'ar HaGilgulim is a Kabbalistic treatise also known as the Wheel of Reincarnations by Isaac Luria, a leading 16th century Kabbalist. And there? Does it explain this whole process in detail? I'm going to give a summary because it has to be brief in this case, but I think it will be pretty clear. And also, I think I'm going to do it from my own perspective, using the language that technology gives us today so that it's much easier to understand. Imagine that you are in an environment where you decide that you want to experience certain things, that you want to go through certain kinds of experiences, that in the environment you come from, that's not possible. It can't happen because of the makeup and circumstances of that environment. You need to set up a virtual environment. So this is possible. We'll call that virtual environment the physical world. It's an environment where good and evil coexist. Good and evil are 2 very different vibrations. Do we agree? Good and evil are vibrationally distant. But what the Creator did in a brilliant way was to make 2 such distant vibrations coexist in a single environment. If He hadn't done this, it would have been impossible for them to ever meet. He creates a place where good and evil coexist. And this environment provides us a setting where we can have experiences that contain both good and bad, or bad and good. I don't care. When we incarnate here, we forget our true nature, which is spiritual, because we are spiritual beings having a physical experience. But we are not from here. I mean, our soul does not belong to this world. In Kabbalah, it is taught that it comes from another plane, another dimension. In Kabbalah, Gan Eden refers to another dimension, not an actual garden, just so we're clear. And when we incarnate in this world, we start to have experiences, and those experiences challenge us to develop our potentials. That's what the game is about. I come with some personal potentials, and with some lessons signed that I want to live those lessons that will give me the opportunity. Life events, the people I meet, the attacks I receive, and also the loves I have, the affections, both positive and negative. And they will make me experience certain things, the profession, the trips I will take, everything, absolutely everything. The Zohar, which is a fundamental book of Kabbalah, the Zohar always explains to us that there are three things that are predetermined and unchangeable. From the moment the soul incarnates in the body, which are the number of years you will live, the financial resources you will have, and whether you will have children or not, and how many children. That is unchangeable. And then there is a whole series of, let's say, elective subjects. And that may or may not be offered, and that may or may not appear, depending on how things go. The video game. The video game has a lot of randomness. I can't remember the Spanish word. Now, not random alternative, now random table. Sorry. So does the game have a lot of randomness? Why? Because there are algorithms that generate themselves all the time. So those algorithms give you events so you can play and respond, training yourself. Immune training. How? Responding, should it be with emuna? With faith that you're connected, and these are the signs and events you must experience in life. When something happens to you, that's significant. First, ask yourself why this is happening. Why is this happening? What lesson must I learn, and how should I respond? Or what response shouldn't I give? It's a very sophisticated game. After that, there are more subjects I call core subjects. In this study that is done in this world, and those core subjects are the subjects that I have signed up for, which are events 4, 5, and 6. Very important. The key events we've chosen to experience in life. Those events come to rectify what happened in previous editions of the video game, in another scenario, in another era, in another time. It's me, but an earlier version of myself. I made mistakes. I did bad things or I did good things. About the bad things I did, I have to make right. For example, if I lied, is very interesting. Kabbalah teaches that people who lie are reincarnated as left-handed in this world. It said left-handed people are left-handed for twisting the truth. So do they reincarnate as left-handed men or women? Do Kabbalah books teach you to identify these signs? What could be one of the rectifications that person comes to do? For example, in my consultations, I use those manuals to understand what the person came to address. There are a lot of signs, and I use a technology, a metaphysical machine called the personality archetype diagram, in which, based on the person's date of birth and their name written in Hebrew, right, I can analyze and see what rectification processes that person comes to do in this world. So what does he bring from previous lives? What does he need to fix here? What are his strengths and weaknesses? And it's very interesting because people have real revelations when they see this and realize the decisions they've made in the past. Some of them could have been made differently. Well, it's okay. They were made in the past. It's done. And now try to make it right. Try to make a better choice in the future, right? And what are his weaknesses? In those weaknesses, try to activate their potentials. We all come with some to develop. In the parable of the talents, we go back to the Christian Gospels. It's very well explained, where this Lord leaves the earth, leaving each of his 3 sons an amount of talents. He gives 10 talents to the eldest son, 5 to the middle son, and 1 to the youngest. I think that's how the story went. When he returns, he asks them to report. Let's see, my children, how have you used the talents I gave you? A talent is a coin, but also a metaphor for your gifts. To the oldest, who received 10 talents based on his ability, he says, the Gospel says, according to his ability, he gives more talent to the soul with greater capacity. What has that soul done with them? Has it developed them? Yes, Father says, I developed them and now bring you 20 talents, right? He gives a financial investment analogy to the one with 5 and asks, what did you do with your capacity? Father, I invested these 5 and got 5 more. It means that person developed talents, developed skills, and the one who only got 1, it means he was a soul with a small container of little capacity, he says. Father, I was afraid. I hid it in the ground because I was scared that you would come and I wouldn't have the talent to give back to you. And then the Creator says to him, well, you've been lazy, and you have to come back to this world to be able to develop your talents. Because you can't live in fear, because you can't dictate your life from fear, because it doesn't allow you to develop your talents. So fear is right in front of us. And that's what the cycle of reincarnations is about. The cycle of reincarnations is a cycle of learning between lives. Or interplays or intertrainings where there's an accumulation. The score you get is cumulative from one training to another. They can be thousands, because in total this is set up. The big picture is that there can be thousands or even millions of trainings or incarnations that you have had. That hardly matters. And since on your plane, time and space don't exist, only we here on this plane can talk about time and space, even with a language that limits us when we try to talk about things that go beyond this plane. As we discussed in the last podcast, is that what reincarnation is about? And in the Kabbalah, it is taught that during the era of the Mashiach, reincarnations will cease. This is a bombshell. Many ask, does that mean no more reincarnations? It doesn't mean there are no reincarnations for a soul that reaches the Messiah level. I meant earlier that they can discern and realize, and to have reached a spiritual level where they no longer need to return. To this game or to these games, it's over. What will happen then? Two things can happen. The soul either returns to the source, where it comes from, or it can choose to come to this world. But now by choice, not for progress, but to help others, or it can go elsewhere. Game environment. That might not exist yet, may need to be created, or maybe it already exists. I'm not sure.
I understand perfectly. I want you to tell me about an experience from your years researching Kabbalah and in your consultations, let's say something paranormal or mystical, regarding this reincarnation thing, to make myself a little more down to earth from your experience.
Well, look, I can tell you what comes to my mind. Several, but I can tell you about an experience I had once in a session with someone. In Spain, we have a lot of history of crypto-Jews. That is, Jews who, since the time of the Inquisition, 1492. We know there was an expulsion. Many Jews, but others converted, in quotes. Many continued practicing Judaism in secret. They're called crypto-Jews, meaning in secret. As the years and generations passed, even secretly, Judaism stopped being practiced. And in many cases, the vast majority of people who come to my office turn out to be descendants of those crypto-Jews. Out of affinity with me, I suppose, because I am one too. So I remember on one occasion that in a completely intuitive way, but with emunah, with absolute certainty. The person was telling me a story and a difficulty they had in life. And I immediately realized that this person came from a branch of crypto-Jews that was expelled and trying to make amends for something from 500 years ago. That person was committing, let's say, an act of revealing information that should have remained private due to his job, but he was, let's say, leaking information to the media about other people. In other words, he was betraying or harming the honor and privacy of certain people. And this was a correction for what they did to her 500 years earlier, since she was Jewish at that time. That is, the neighbors, let's say, made her. They betrayed and reported her, among other things. I discover this when the person takes using their personality archetype diagram, name, and my research on them. So this person, upon discovering this, suddenly enters a strong emotional state. They become aware, shed a tear, become aware of the truth, because when you realize that the truth is the truth, you get chills all over your body, your hair stands on end. It's something very significant when you identify the truth. And at that moment, he realized he needed to stop, likely change careers, move to another city, and make several major changes. Since his correction was complete and he was already aware, it no longer made sense for him to stay there.
I understand. Can you elaborate a little more for me? Diagram of the personality archetype. How do you execute that query? For someone who wants to rectify the mistakes they made in the past, or injustices or murders. Look,
This is done through the person's date of birth, the date of birth in our common calendar, in our Gregorian calendar. The official date matters most since many people are born on one day but registered on another. There's another interesting trait there with its own significance, but I won't get into that.
go ahead and elaborate on whatever you want, Raúl. I'm really interested, yes. All right.
When a person has a birth date but is registered on a different date, in other words, when they're registered on one date but were actually born on another date, there's a gap, a period I consider, so I account for both dates, because it tells you what tikkun they need to fix. Also, some information can be ignored, it's important. And it usually involves children who aren't from the parents they claim. That is, usually the father is not the one people think he is, and it's not someone else, in my experience.
Well, when they register him on different dates.
But it's more about the grandparents' generation. In the Torah, it is written that the children will inherit the sins of the fathers up to the third and fourth generation. Does that mean that the short circuits or mistakes made by the grandparents and great-grandparents will be embodied in the grandchildren? The grandchildren won't understand the origins or reasons behind their situation. They'll see it as bad luck, but it's actually how they're programmed to live. That's because reincarnations all happen within the same family tree. Always. This is interesting too. So what happens is that it generates a summary of information about that soul, about those family members who share what that soul agreed to. To rectify, you might want a little bit of information from the paternal great-grandfather, a little bit from the maternal great-grandmother, and some from the grandfather. And you start making a sort of mix of those parts that you want to rectify in this world. That's the potential your soul has found within your own genealogy, right? So if the personality archetype diagram is based on your date of birth, it allows you to find out what information you came to rectify. What are the facts, the events that your ancestors, let's say, did in a wrong way, but not because it was wrong, but because they lacked information, they lacked knowledge. And now the grandson or granddaughter who has knowledge, who has curiosity, who has the ability to question things, needs to live better by seeking answers, then he knows the answer is within him. And the date of birth, it's like a code, because remember that numbers can be translated into Hebrew letters. As discussed in the previous podcast, Hebrew letters are the archetypes and computational language of creation. So, in the DAP, I can take all the numbers and convert them into Hebrew letters. And there's a really deep study there about what rectifications he comes to make.
Restless, a question. A generation, an Asian civilization, yes, zero contact with the Hebrew world, never. Yes, they don't have this kind of thing. The culture before China is a culture and civilization millennia old worldwide. They have no access to such information.
They do, because it's also written in the Torah that there are 12 tribes of Israel and there are lost tribes. And many went very far away. So, if you start to analyze, for example, traditional Chinese medicine and the concepts of traditional Chinese medicine, with what the Zohar explains in Kabbalah, for example, it says that a man's semen comes from the head, and traditional Chinese medicine says the same thing. Concepts that are so radical and that shake many of the concepts of orthodox medicine, let's say, and also regarding facial features, hair features, and body features. There are many affinities. There is also a lot of affinity between yoga and Kabbalah, a lot. Why? Because what yoga seeks is the circulation of energies and the healing of energies throughout the bodily vehicles. The bodily vehicles are several, not just the physical one. There are also etheric vehicles, soul vehicles, emotional vehicles. And in Kabbalah, it is taught exactly the same way. The soul has a physical level, a level called nefesh, an emotional level called ruach, and an intellectual level called neshama, etc. That is to say, the concepts are parallel, and there are a series of very interesting studies on this. Parallelism between the different cultures, these Eastern ones that you are referring to. In reality, they make one wisdom fit perfectly with the other. That is, they are complementary, if you will. That they help each other. That is also part of the Mashiach era. Mashiach is Yeshua. I have understood. There is a mind, there is understanding, and I have realized that I can help myself with one wisdom, and I can help myself with the other. I don't need to be dogmatic or radical with either. But actually, all the wisdom lies within my own soul, and all my soul does is recognize it. When it notices that the truth is right there in front of it, it recognizes it and then feels attracted to that truth and wants to study that truth. And does that apply to Chinese medicine or to yoga, to Reiki, to any other wisdom of healing or personal self-knowledge? The Enneagram, for example, of Gurdjieff. All the teachings of Gurdjieff. I could mention all the transpersonal psychology of Charles Tart in Spain, of Antonio Blay. I don't know, the whole Gestalt school, all the psychology schools that help you go further. Bio-neuroemotion, for example, the relationship between the symptom and the emotional conflict. Well, all that knowledge is complementary and comes together. Kabbalists say that since Kabbalah covers everything, ultimately it's all Kabbalah, as they're all Kabbalistic concepts. Actually, all those concepts belong to the instruction manual of the human being, which at the end of the day is encoded. And in the Torah?
Understood. In the last program, I also missed something. You mentioned the ether. What is it? You just mentioned the etheric part. Yes, what is that? How do you define it? Why is it important?
The ether, is it? In traditional Chinese medicine, it's called qi, or the fundamental energy with which we live, speak, eat. It's what makes us move, what keeps us alive. And there's a German scientist who emigrated to the United States named Wilhelm Reich. He died. He was already a disciple of Freud, and Wilhelm Reich discovered how to manipulate the ether. He developed a machine called the Cloud Buster to generate rain. What is it? A machine? To develop clouds and to destroy clouds, that is, to create rain and to make the rain disappear as well. In the 1950s, he was arrested by the FBI and had all his materials confiscated. And that man was arrested, and, well, they left him a bit in misery, didn't they? Why do I say this? Because he called the ether by another name, orgone, which is also a concept that will sound familiar to many listeners. Orgone is the same thing, it's the ether, but called that by Wilhelm Reich. So he learned to manipulate that energy in order to benefit from it, for example, by generating rain. For example, that same energy in previous civilizations was used to create physical regeneration chambers. People who have been found, and I'm talking about very ancient civilizations, people who were found in poor physical condition, they enter a chamber that is made of stone, and in that chamber, what now? Which in archaeology are called dolmens, right? But in reality, they are quantum regeneration chambers where certain technologies were used. With the position of the sun, the moon, the stars, that is, choosing the right moment to regenerate. The whole body through the etheric body. In Kabbalah, it is taught that illness comes from the neshama, that is, from one of the highest levels. But actually, illness or the process of becoming ill can come from an emotional layer or from a layer a little closer to the physical, the etheric, and treating each symptom in each of the layers that corresponds to it. That's where we can succeed in correcting that unhealthy process or illness, or actually that process of learning. Of the soul?
So the ether is basically the energy of life.
That's it. In Chinese medicine, it's called qi.
Who has taken over God in the modern world? I don't know if this is your opinion or if you agree with what I'm about to say. That human beings are becoming more and more distant from the spiritual plane in this era. This serves clear purposes of Humans operate mainly in a material world, which you call controlled by RAF beings, and I also refer to them as such. Satanic Illuminati. Well, I'm not gonna keep elaborating.
Which one?
Is that your opinion regarding the statement I just made? And above all, what kind of intention could they have to separate a culture and a civilization so deeply rooted in Europe, specifically in Christianity? What could be the reason for putting so much will, so much effort, so much money, and so much expense into distancing us from traditional European spirituality?
Well, it's very simple. It's to inject you with fear. If you have emuna, a strong faith in God, you are not afraid. And you can't be manipulated. That's true. And you can't be manipulated. No, it's not a lie, of course. So what happens? Evil forces aim to distance you from God and make it seem God doesn't exist. To make it seem like only material and immediate things matter. To make it seem like there are constant and continuous emergency situations, invented, provoked ad hoc, to keep you in a survival state while you are in a survival state. We are in what is called the carnival, and the carnival doesn't stop. And while you're at the carnival, you're not anywhere else. The problem is that there's one carnival after another continuously, and that keeps people from reflecting on themselves. Shut yourself in your room, as the Gospels say. When you pray to the Father, do so privately, and you will find Him within you, since the Father dwells inside you. What does that mean? Does it mean we need time for spiritual routines? What should I say? That time, people don't find it because they're distracted. And I say they're distracted, not by themselves, but they're being distracted so they don't find it. And if they don't find it, they don't connect. And if they don't connect, they're easy to manipulate. That is, the goal is manipulation, because remember that manipulation is for the survival of the forces of evil. Evil forces wouldn't make sense if they didn't do their job well. And it's clear that they do it very well, so they still make sense. A wise man, once a wise master, was asked, "When will the pandemic end?" And the wise man said, when we no longer need it. As a spiritual lesson, the wise man says, once humanity outgrows this teaching, a new one will emerge.
Understood. Ultimately, I also wanted to ask why. A non-believer or non-spiritual person deeply rooted in the material world usually uses this argument to discredit the existence of God. And it's if God exists, if, as you call it, the source, vital energy connects everything. People can call it whatever they like. Why does it allow suffering? Why is pain necessary in this world? Why does God allow war? Why does God allow hunger? Why does God allow poverty? Why does God allow a child to have cancer?
I'll start with the last one. A child has cancer. It's about their reincarnation cycle and the tikkun that rectifies the soul. For example, there are times when a soul finishes its cycle of reincarnations and only needs to incarnate, let's say 3 or 4 months, to live an experience and leave this world. Because let's say that's the amount of learning they had left. It's not just for him, but also for the parents and family. In other words, are the lessons interconnected with everyone who interacts, for example, with this child you told me about? Why does he allow suffering? It's not that he allows suffering, it's that in this game, everything is allowed, within the range between good and evil. And in evil, there is suffering, but in the end, evil is not really evil because it can turn into good. If you turn that suffering into something that helps you grow and transform spiritually, and actually, as it is written in the Talmud, God is where your problems are. Most people try to run away from their problems and don't want anything to do with them when what the mystical, spiritual sources are teaching you. That is, if you have a problem or you have a challenge, you have an obstacle, don't run away from it. God is there to teach you a lesson, to connect with you, pay attention, accept, learn, give thanks, and make decisions. Someone once asked a wise man, "How do you have such good health at 120 years old?" "What do you do for good health?" The wise man answered, "Decisions." And that means it will take you very far in your life. The fact of making decisions. Some won't be pleasant, some you won't like. But we didn't come here to please others. We came here to please ourselves, to be consistent. And those things that are not acceptable in your life, you need to look at yourself. And those things that hurt you, you need to look at yourself. You can learn up to a certain point, but then at another point, you have to review it. That is to address the pain, the suffering. Why does God allow suffering? Well, because it's also written in the Talmud that God helps you, even if you want to do evil. Because of what I'm telling you, since it's within this world's frequency range. It's part of the game, but if you want to do good, it gives you every option. You have free will, which is the great gift that human beings have. Now, having used free will, prepare to face the consequences of your actions, because things get tough. All your actions have consequences. If you do wrong, you'll face consequences. Maybe in the next life, do good and you'll be rewarded in this one. It's written that good reaches you faster than bad. Another rule of this game. In other words, the acts of kindness you do will come back to you much sooner than the acts of evil. The acts of evil will give you the appearance that everything is fine, that everything is okay, but in the next life, you will come back and you will suffer. But come on, what's not written? And you're going to ask yourself, why? Are you a child with cancer? I'm explaining myself.
Yes, I understand the concept you're trying to give me. It's just that I got stuck because you touched on the book I wanted to discuss with you. Yes, the Talmud, yes, very controversial, very criticized by Christians from other times, historically speaking. And it contains certain verses that I don't think are misinterpreted. They're clear, and I've researched before doing this show with you. And that's where I feel the most, and not curiosity, but I want to know your opinion. Raúl, go ahead.
Let's go for it.
Sanhedrin 27. I think it literally says that Jesus Christ is a sorcerer and is being boiled in a cauldron of excrement. That is to say, in the Talmud, the figure of Christ is something to be torn down. Christ is the enemy. No. They just say that he's in the fifth hell, boiling in excrement. Literally, that's what they say. They also say he was the son of a prostitute. Did you already answer that for me in the previous show? He also makes a very clear distinction between what is a Jew and what is a goyim. He makes a clear distinction. While there are specific rules for interacting with Jewish people and different ones for non-Jewish people like us, the goyim, at the end of the day, to the people of Israel or to the Jews. After Europe became Christian, they have been expelled from more than 109 countries. If your friend gets kicked out of 109 bars, you start to wonder if it's more than just bad luck. Well, that's normal, isn't it? I mean, I think it's a pretty logical correlation, like if you get kicked out of that many places, something must be going on. It's not magic or just because, look, potato and why. I think if you investigate the Talmud a little, you can realize it, and on top of that, you see how the banks operate. And you realize it. That in the Talmud is justified, and we all know who controls the banks. That's not a lie either. So I want to know how in the Talmud, how would it be justified? No, it's not that it really says this. No, it's really that this is misinterpreted. Because for me personally, I don't have hate in my heart. I don't hate anyone. I'm just a seeker of truth. I try to see the root of certain problems and looking at the modern dynamic, which for me is the main problem. I'm risking a lot with the channel. By saying this, I don't trust any politician because no politician addresses the root problem. The root problem is money. Fiat, central banks, and the United States Federal Reserve with the petrodollar, which is backed by smoke and nothing until someone dared to talk about this. Kennedy, we know how long he lasted, Kennedy. So, looking at who controls the banks, looking at various quotes from the Talmud, one wonders to what extent they have a supremacist philosophy of life with respect to the rest.
You've touched on a lot of topics. If you allow me, I'll start from the beginning. Yes.
You're right, I've made a statement here.
You made a passionate statement, which I appreciate. So let's start from the beginning. The beginning is the Talmud quote that you talk about, the one you refer to. saying that Jesus boils in a cauldron of excrement or something like that, right? Yes? Well, the interpretation is as follows. It doesn't mean that Jesus boils in a cauldron of excrement. That's a code. The Talmud is written in code. You shouldn't read it on a literal level. In Kabbalah, we know. And if you don't know, I'll explain it briefly. There are 4 levels of reading. The first level is called PSAT, which means the literal level. The literal level is the story, what you refer to, what the quote literally says. Its sole purpose is to hold the secret inside. It is just the vessel, not the information itself. There are also 2 other levels, Rems and Drash, involving allusions or gematria calculations, where I can access information in Hebrew that contains that word or that verse, which will reveal other truths to me. Finally, the 4th and deepest level, Sod, is what interests the Kabbalists. The secret Sod is a secret. What's encoded in that phrase? That's where I'm going. I'll reveal the Sod, the secret behind the phrase you mentioned. The secret is Jesus. It's a way of saying Messiah, Jesus, or Mashiach, that they boil a cauldron of excrement. Does this mean that for you personally to reach the level of Mashiach consciousness, what? Do you have to boil in excrement? You have to go down into the mud. You have to get yourself dirty with crap, and you have to understand the harm that is created in this world and overcome it. To grow spiritually, you must face challenges. You don't need to isolate yourself to pray and meditate all day. You don't have to fight it out in the arena. Boil in a cauldron of filth. This world is a cauldron of filth.
In yourself?
About the second topic you mentioned, how do the Talmud and Jewish tradition in general distinguish between the Goyim and the Yudim? Do you mean Jews and non-Jews? Goyim, are they considered nations? But here we also have to understand that we're speaking in Jewish code and in Hebrew. He's from the tribe of Yehuda, a son of Yaakov. Did Yaakov have 12 sons? It's also a code. And one of the sons, his tribe is called Yehuda. Yehuda? It's written Yud Ham Dalet Ha Yehuda, which is the tetragrammaton, but with the letter Dalet in the middle. The tetragrammaton, or Yud He Vav Ha, is the well-known name of God found in the synagogue, which is actually a way to refer to the soul. Because just like God, the source and the soul have the same quality, because the soul is integrated into God. Writing that code makes it clear it's referring to the same thing at different fractal levels. But it's the same. The Christian Gospels say the Father always dwells in you, meaning His spark is always within you. Why do they separate Jews from non-Jews? Porsche, because actually the word Jew refers to someone who opens the door to the Creator. That's literally what Jew means. Jew means someone who opens his heart to the Creator. With this definition, who is considered a Jew and who isn't?
That's actually a question I want to ask you, Raúl. To what extent is there a difference between you, worldview, and how many people can't reach it? Or how many people from this religion might end up misinterpreting it? That's the point, since in the end you give yourself to me, right? The secret of the Zohar of Jesus is boiling in a cauldron of excrement. Okay, you interpret it that way, which even portrays Jesus as a Messiah.
A very elevated way, even. No.
No, I'm not saying that way is right or wrong. What I'm saying is to what extent the interpretation of that secret or that Zohar is interpreted by the Jews. It is.
That's the point. Okay, so I'll tell you, but now we're talking about Jews of the Jewish religion, right?
No, I'm not discussing that here anymore. Be careful, this topic is very controversial. Raúl, I'm not referring to that point. We're all Jews and we open our hearts.
That's right. It's just that the word Jew is misunderstood because literally Jew comes from Yehudi, from the tribe of
Yehuda, that's it.
That's literal.
Yeah, well, we're not talking about, but
What happens is that, like everything, it has a mystical background. He's referring to your soul. He's referring to how you open your soul to the Creator. I understand. And for the Creator to take control of your life, you don't control your life, you surrender it to the Creator. So the Creator can fulfill His plans for you through you. There's no resistance, only flow. Difficult trials may come, but Abraham faced 10 extremely hard trials and is a great patriarch of humanity. You understand? I mean, we are not exempt from tough trials, but we have emunah, the faith that what is happening to me is for my learning and in the end for my own good. So what's the difference between Jews and non-Jews, the one I just told you about? What do goy or goyim mean? It means anyone who is not Jewish. Someone who doesn't open their heart to the Creator or consider Him in their life leaves Him aside. The Creator, being polite and respectful, doesn't interfere. He lets you act and have free will because it's a gift.
Yes, I understand. I understand that there are many people who have this interpretation, but do you admit to me that there are just as many who simply see it as goyim? It's anyone who isn't.
Of course, on a geopolitical level, or let's say on a geographic level, that
Is the last topic we're going to cover.
okay, but for me this topic is irrelevant.
Why?
Why? What's important to me is realizing the spiritual depth that analyzing situations can take you to, or the verses from the Talmud or the Torah that help you progress spiritually. What you see on the outside, what appears to be a war or an apparent external war or a battle or a dialectic. In reality, it's just a reflection of the battle you have inside yourself. And that inner battle is also it's called the War of Gog and Magog. It's not an external war, it's an internal war. Between your good inclination and your bad inclination, and it's the constant battle we have within ourselves. So for me and for the Kabbalists, not just for me, the Kabbalists teach it very clearly.
Clearly aware that there are many Kabbalists. I want to make this clear that there are many Jews who are completely against it. There's an internal conflict among Jews, but not as you define them. It's among those who follow Judaism. That's why
The problem
the problem comes when a person notices certain patterns and wants to lump everyone together.
Look, I'm going to tell you something very clearly. In my opinion, this is not the time for religions. In my opinion, for me, religions have had a purpose and they still do. As long as they strengthen you and make you a man of faith or a woman of faith, that helps you continue your life in an honest, sincere, productive, and transformative way. In my view, religion has fulfilled its role in history up to now. But the moment you become aware that it's really a matter of responsibility, that is deeply personal. At that time, you can choose to follow any religion or not. I respect all beliefs and I'm not dogmatic. No, with beliefs. I say yes to everything.
The world right now, it may seem like I'm confronting you. You're my friend,
Yes, okay.
and I value you a lot as a person. On top of that, you have incredible honesty when you speak. The thing is, it's true that I and many people, having an expert in that whole field, we're starting to have a series of doubts regarding certain topics. And I think they're legitimate, not to mention, they're legitimate, of course. And I think covering it up underneath. It's not that I'm afraid they'll label me as this, no.
No, that they label me as something else. There's nothing to hide.
The issue is it's been concealed. As the saying goes, see who you can criticize and you'll know who controls you. And honestly, can you really mess with Christians? Perfect, no problem. You can mess with Muslims, and many will call you Islamophobic, that's it. Now, messing with the people we're talking about, not messing with them, I mean making a legitimate criticism. Man, when everything falls apart, YouTube shuts down your channels and your accounts can get hacked. You can lose it all yourself. So this conversation is genuinely to seek understanding and to get the opinion of an expert who understands that world very well. And you yourself have told me they're legitimate?
Yes, obviously, yes.
So, what's happening in the world? Because I'm seeing more and more of a reaction to all of this that I just told you about, and it's getting bigger and bigger, and it's only going to keep growing. Because you can't hide the sun with one finger?
Right? But it will only get worse. And what's happening in the world out there, yes, out there. We are on the material plane. Now we are in Malchut, in Kabbalah, that is on the material plane. So what's happening out there is what is supposed to happen. Chaos, there has to be absolute chaos. Carnival, that is. This chaos has to happen. Why? Because only by shaking the wasp nest, by kicking the wasp nest, do the wasps come out. Because the role of the forces of evil is to create chaos. For what purpose? To make you see your own inner chaos and for you to bring order to your life? Thank you. If we talk on a geostrategic or geopolitical level, it's a dimensional plane we can talk about. But that puts us on a plane of politics, geostrategy, and economics. Of, let's say, the rules of the video game in the physical plane. Yes, great. That's a plane of consciousness. If we talk about spirituality, we move to a higher plane of consciousness where the interest lies in what lessons everything happening in the world has for me, and specifically in what concerns me.
All right, so let's approach it from that plane.
And that higher plane is the one I'm talking about all the time.
No, yes, I know, but with everything. I mean, I want you to analyze what's happening for me. How did you call it on the material plane?
Geopolitical or geostrategic? What did you say in the video?
In the Malchut?
Malchut?
Malchut. I want you to give me an analysis of the Malchut. I think it's important to understand the material plane.
Will you explain it? Of course.
And I really like what I learned from you because it's valuable. Often I focus too much on material things, and maybe that's for the best. I need to see how I react to things that will inevitably happen. But I would like an analysis of how your soul is transformed or what explanation your spirit or your spirituality gives to what is happening in the Malchut. Understand me, audience? The material plane.
Malchut is fundamental. I mean, in Kabbalah, the material plane is fundamental because that's where the Kabbalists come. They say to gather soul sparks that have been left behind. Lost in past lives, meaning teachings. We return to the plane of reincarnations, where in past lives I left things unfinished or unsolved. All right? For that, we need a scenario to be created where there are several levels of events. There are personal event levels, there are family events, there are national and international events. All right? There are several planes of events.
Yes, Christian, that's how we're going to organize community events.
Exactly. So let's say there are several planes of events. Each of those planes generates what is known in Jungian psychology as an egregor. That is, it creates its own, it has its own life, so to speak. It has its own reality. Since we are beings, we are multidimensional and can manage all those planes simultaneously within Malchut. We also manage additional planes on a subliminal level, which are already part of the non-physical plane. That is, from our internal qualities, such as kindness, generosity, or setting boundaries for others, whether on the psychological level or on the spiritual level, like meditation or connecting with the divine, and so on. In other words, on a transcendent level. Well, at all those levels, human beings have the ability to manage them all at once, and that's called the tree of life, where you have all of that. It's a whole world. Specifically, Malchut, which you asked me about, is fundamental for a simple reason, because in Kabbalah it's called Egypt. When we read the Torah and see the stories about Egypt, which in Hebrew is called Mitzrayim, Mitzrayim comes from the Hebrew root Zar, which means narrowness. Malchut is where the soul experiences a kind of narrowness. It's inside a body, it's inside a dimension where things happen to it, and it's in a state of narrowness. For what purpose? To experience what it means to leave Egypt. Where to? To Israel. It's all a metaphor. When the Jewish people are pursued by the Egyptians, they cross the Red Sea with Moshe leading them, and then they go from being pursued by the Egyptians to finding themselves in other dimensions. That's why the Red Sea opens. The answer to be able to overcome their difficulties. He's talking about you, me, and all of us. Because our emunah, our faith, will make us. So that the solution appears before us in the physical world. Malchut Egypt, what we need at every moment for every situation. And we make decisions. Is it bad to have money in the material world? It's neither bad nor good. It's neutral. It depends on how you use it. Is a scalpel bad? That depends too. Good for healing, bad for killing. So it's not the tool itself, it's not the energy itself, it's what you do with it and what you do with it. It will depend on your level of consciousness. Your level of consciousness depends on your study's depth and self-examination. And everything that you are aware of in your daily life. That is to say, we have to be aware that we update ourselves daily, several times in our consciousness, depending on the events and inputs we receive and how we react to them. So, It's a continuous training, it's a very tough training, and it's a training that requires constant faith and constant inner strength. And that only happens in Malchut. Malchut would be the ring, the Museo ring.
I understand. And then what happens on the material plane? What's happening on the material plane? Epstein list, Federal Reserve, expulsion, things happening around countries and so on. How? How can it be explained from a spiritual perspective? I mean, we don't have control over what happens. But at the end of the day, we've had to live through a series of circumstances, and that obviously affects our spirituality, it affects our actions, it affects everything. At the end of the day, how do you explain the current geopolitical landscape? Most importantly, Raúl, what advice would you give young people? The one who is starting to have more and more nationalist, anti-Semitic, and other similar feelings? Because honestly, that's where I'm starting to get a little scared. A possible reactionary wave that is going to emerge in Europe because the security forces, politics, and international banking are not giving answers to young people. And we've all known that in times of crisis, in times when young people have no purpose, in times when young people have no way to fulfill themselves, on the material level is where frustrations come, where hatred begins, and where inevitably the world, the Malchut plane, the material plane, will end up imploding. I'm not sure if I understood the concept correctly. My question?
Perfectly. Let's start from the beginning. A. How can geopolitical events help you? Or what is the point of those major geopolitical and geostrategic events that you are referring to? Well, in the plan, they have several uses. The first is to help you discern. Because when you observe them and you have the ability to discern, you can realize what is happening. You use discernment to see what's truly happening, leading to a leap in consciousness. That is to say, in that regard, they are very useful. Some affect your daily life more, some less, and some not at all. In what? Does it affect you materially? Yes, it does. For example, I remember the last crisis when Russia's bank accounts were frozen in banks in England. Yes, with the start of the local war. Exactly. Well, that's when the elites take a series of measures. And what does that affect the price of? Well, of fuel. Does it affect your daily life? Well, a little. It affects you a little because the price of gasoline or diesel goes up. That raises both transportation and food prices. What does the Kabbalah say about this? It says it can affect you, but you can counteract it.
Explain it to me.
Because there is a concept in Kabbalah called Parnasa. Parnasa means sustenance. Many people associate it only with money, but money is an energy, which is an energy of sustenance. How to sustain yourself in the world.
It could also be food,
etc.
augmented reality house.
May you never lack Parnasa, may you never lack sustenance. So Kabbalah gives us tools so that you never lack Parnasa in such a way that you are immunized. If fuel prices go up, if not, because you will always keep earning more and at the same rate as you were earning before. Why? Because you have imuna, you have faith, and you have the tools to be able to generate more than what they're trying to take away from you. I don't know if I'm making myself clear.
Yes.
That's on one hand. The same thing happens with geostrategic events that affect you, for example, in another aspect of your life. For example, do you want to replace a car part? And it turns out that the parts aren't coming because they come from China. And since there's a war with China or there's controversy with China, semiconductors aren't arriving and car repairs take a month, right? Well, you have two options. Either you make your life miserable or you look for an alternative that helps you develop your potential. That is, global geostrategic events affect you, yes, on a personal level, some more, some less, but in reality, they're just part of the carnival. And they affect you mostly in your ability to discern and sense what really matters and what really doesn't. Because at the end of the day, the only thing that happens is that we're in this world to learn about ourselves and what is shown to us on the screen. So, that's what all those geopolitical, strategic events are for, etc. I mean,
in the end, A Kabbalist focuses everything on the spiritual plane. The material plane is fine, it's there. No.
No, that's not what I do at all. On the contrary. Jota, excuse me? For the Kabbalist, one doesn't have to escape to the spiritual planes. One exists in the material plane. Where the real struggle happens in the arena, the Kabbalist doesn't run away from the material. On the contrary, the Kabbalist faces the real struggle in the arena. Yeshua, the Messiah, boils in a cauldron of filth in this world to face the real struggle. I understand. Do you understand? That's a Kabbalist. The Kabbalist doesn't run away from the material world. On the contrary, what the Kabbalist does is bring the highest spiritual levels down to this world. For what? To give himself spiritual strength?
I also have a question for you. I understand that there have been great wars within Judaism against the Kabbalists. Yes, can you elaborate on that a bit? That is, the Kabbalists, let's say, are not well regarded by all branches of the Jewish people, not by a long shot. Right? Yes, I mean, there have been persecutions, there are rabbis who are completely, deeply anti-Kabbalah, yes, and who are much more so. Let's say, and what about that literal Ottoman world? That's where I've seen all the later problems. Exactly. Tell me about the history of the wars against Kabbalists.
This is an interesting topic because, as we discussed in the previous podcast, some people infiltrated the Jewish community. Apparently Jews, but they're not. They're the ones who really rule the world. They call themselves Jews, but they're not. They're the ones, because they're not.
Are they who you thought I meant earlier?
And then, within the branch, let's say, of rabbis or spiritual leaders within the Jewish people, of course, all those who condemn the spread of knowledge that sets you free will be against it. That is, among those who apparently seem to be good people and who care for their congregants. Let's put it this way. It's quite the opposite. I'll give you an example. During the events of 2020, I closely follow a spiritual teacher, a rabbi who is very dear to me, Rabbi Alona Nava. He is a very combative man. With the events of 2020, a rabbi with extraordinary vision and clairvoyance. As I mentioned, I follow him closely. I interviewed him in Israel, and the interview is on my channel. It's pure gold. And this man tells it like it is. He says what many of us see, right? He's not afraid. He doesn't hide.
What truth is that?
Well, it was all just a charade, etc. I won't get into it to avoid your video being taken down, but we agree on that. And he reported it, and he really put himself on the line. He reported things like, Israel has two main rabbinical authorities, one for Sephardic Jews and one for Ashkenazi Jews. Ashkenazi Jews are those who come from Northern Europe. And Sephardic Jews are those from the Sepharad region, which includes us in Spain, Portugal, Spain, the Mediterranean, Morocco, and so on. Those are Sephardic, right? Okay? The rabbinical leaders of Israel recommended inoculation to their congregants. And with that, I'm saying everything. Well, there are no more questions.
So, at the end of the day, yes, also, well, a lot of us priests are like that too. It's just that, at the end of the day, we live in rather turbulent times. And I don't want people to misunderstand my intentions when I talk about such controversial topics. What I intend is to keep quiet in a certain sense. No, keep quiet isn't the right word. What I intend is to restrain myself. A reactionary wave, quite, that can become quite dangerous, but at the end of the day, it still remains quite justified, because at the end of the day, if we observe patterns, you realize that the leaders of the big pharmaceutical companies belong to a certain group. We also realize that if you look at Hollywood, it's absolute dominance. We go to the medical industry, it's the same. We go to the music industry, it's the same. And all these industries have ties to the arms industry, state cabinets. At the end of the day, one might come to think that there really is complete Western control by these people. And that these people, at the end of the day, were the ones who set up this charade.
Of course. If you reach that conclusion, you'll likely be right. But I insist, that happens at a geopolitical, geostrategic level. What does it teach you? I always return to personal responsibility. What does it mean to you? Do you understand? It's
A big question, honestly. I haven't really thought about it.
But what does it mean to you then? But I invite the listeners to ask themselves this question. What did the events of 2020 or even the economic crisis of 2008 mean to you? Which was also a key geopolitical and geoeconomic event? Or for me, one of the turning points, probably the most important one, the fall of the Twin Towers. So, of course, then from that point on, a series of events begins to unfold where an agenda with a specific goal is set in motion. But that's just on the surface in the game's script.
Who decides the script? The source does, naturally, but why not?
It's the source? Sorry, Jota, it's not the source. Evil exists because it's created in a world where both good and evil must exist. Duality. So that we as players here are able to experience things that we wouldn't be able to experience in any other environment.
And what's the very purpose of that experience? What is it?
That the source knows itself?
What do you mean by the source knowing itself?
Yes, because the unique source is unaware of itself. It must create the illusion of standing before a mirror, generating a duality that appears as two, though there is actually only one. Looking at oneself in a mirror.
That one.
The concept of a hologram. So the source can experience itself in new unknown ways. It has to develop its own potentials under the illusion of division. In reality, unity is not divisible. It seems like it is divisible, but it is not divisible. It's divisible because standing in front of a mirror makes it appear as two. If you place another mirror in front of the first, it looks like there are three, and so on. We're in the hall of mirrors. You are divinity, I am divinity, they are divinity. If we have the ability to go to the Father who dwells within us, we will have the ability to have that strength to understand that we are in training. And is this going to give us the key? Seeing every event in our lives from a new perspective? That's simple and nothing easy.
No, it's not easy at all. And above all, I want to ask you a question. So, a person who commits sexual acts with children? Yes, no, I'll say the word, though it's often censored. Is that person also divinity? Yes.
Everything and everyone on this plane is divine, each with a divine spark inside.
Then how would you define such an atrocious and malevolent act?
Do you call it atrocious and malevolent because we exist on a dual plane?
But isn't it terrible and evil to have relations with children?
Yes, but on the dual plane. In Malchut, it is, of course. It's outrageous nonsense. But then you have to keep going up levels. Also to understand what meaning that has in the lives of those 2 or 3 people, or however many are involved in that act. A war is an atrocity, it's an atrocity. What justification does man have from the physical point of view? The sale of weapons to begin with? Or to conquer a certain territory, take certain resources, etc. But spiritually, what does that involve? Soldiers die, civilians die. As I said, we must respect each soul's destiny, even if it hurts. Every soul has its own path. Teach them this. Kriko, that's written.
Do you know how to say? My path in life depends on destiny, not my decisions.
Partly, yes, I explained it before, but I think it's important, so I'm going to say it again.
Repeat it, yes.
Yes, this is extremely important to me, especially when you incarnate in this plane. There are what I call core subjects, like in university, that if you want to pursue a certain degree, you have to take them, those core subjects, no matter what, to the core subjects. I call them that because they're the 4 or 5 key tests you experience in life, the ones you sign up for. I'm going to live through this. All right, there are core subjects, the main ones you can't change. Listen, you can ask for help. That's right, you can ask for help to get through it better, to make it easier, but you still have to go through them, okay? But you can ask for help, you can, and that's the emula, it gives you strength. And help can also appear along the way, very important. You have to be open to help all the time. And then there are the substantive subjects, which are random, depending on the free will decisions you make. So that will be generated as you go. In an automatic way, your decisions will result in a series of inputs. meeting certain people and events. Those you do have the ability to change. You can't change the core subjects of this world, the ones you chose to experience by coming here. I insist, you can ask for help, and in fact, it's good to ask for help because many times our strength falters, many times we feel lost, we feel weak. At that moment, you have to look for your inner father. Not just at that moment, actually you should always have it. That's why spiritual habits are so important.
Because
Spiritual habits, prayer, meditation, study. For me, it's fundamental. Singing or music, I don't know. There's a lot. Everything that fills your soul actually comes from the divinity, and the divinity gives it to you so you can use it to lift your spirits and to give you morale, strength. In prayer, a powerful phenomenon occurs, direct communication with the Creator. In Kabbalah, Idbonenot means meditation and shares the same numerology as Bereshit, the Torah's first word. In the beginning? Doesn't in the beginning mean God made the heaven and earth? Bereshit means in the beginning. Yeah, well, it has a numerology of 913, the same as Idbonenut, meditation. We are in a meditation of the Creator who is meditating upon us right now. Here live. Since we carry a spark of the Creator, we can shape our own reality just as the Creator does. Meditating on what? Hebrew letters? Why? Because they are the source code of reality. And that's what Kabbalists do. That's why it's written that a Kabbalist can change the fate of the world from a room, sitting in a chair.
And once I heard a very wise person who literally told me that the most powerful people in the world were not those who had the most money, but those who had the power to transform the human psyche. That's right. Are there wise men in an African cave who can attract a private jet if needed?
Yes.
Do they have it? Yes.
They want it. Do they want it? Of course, because their spiritual level is so high that they connect directly with the source and connect directly with the physical manifestation of events, or material objects.
Can you elaborate on that for me? Because when I heard that, it kind of blew my mind.
Yes, there are two things here. One thing is that it will depend on your spiritual level and awareness. I mean, you need to have a certain spiritual level for that to happen. I'm mentioning this because years ago, the popular book, The Secret, gained popularity here. I don't know if you've heard of it. The audience has probably heard of it. Where the idea is brought up that you have the innate ability or the faculty to generate events. There's another part that needs to be told. And the thing is, you have to have the merits for that. It's not free. You have to have earned it. In your spiritual checking account, you have to have a balance. You have to have funds in order to generate events. If you have a negative balance or are in the red, it means you've committed many evil acts. So you're going to have a lot of trouble generating events that will harm other people, but not events that will benefit you.
Don't you think that the people we've talked about before, the Fraf beings, infiltrators, whatever you want to call them, do have this ability to generate events? And they do it.
They do it. What happens is that they do it because they control the material level. They do it from the manhood, yes, that's it. They never do it from spirituality. They don't use psychological levels of manipulation of the population's cognitive processes, that's true, but it's still manhood, it's still something very material. They depend on manipulation to make people controlled by fear. They force them into survival mode. It's pure manhunt.
Okay, that is, they don't have the ability to generate events on a spiritual level.
No, because if that were the case, they wouldn't be doing what they do. I mean, if that were the case, there would be more. On the side of good. The difference between good and evil is that good has the ability. The good that is within us, mind you, it's not outside of us, it's also within us. It can generate high-level events known as Geset in Kabbalah, kindness. The 72 names of God come directly from Geset. How do we know this? Because there are 72 and the gematria of the word Geset is 72. Do you understand? The 72 names of God are only for Geset, for kindness, nothing else. The forces of evil cannot use them to do evil because they are formulas for doing good. They are Geset and
the codes are immutable.
Those codes are not only immutable, they come in the Torah. Not even a single letter can be changed. And each one of those codes generates abundance and energy of well-being for the people who meditate on them. But what about the merit, on the other hand, that you have to earn through your behavior? You can't be, just so everyone gets me. You can't be an evil person doing evil things and expect that by meditating on the 72 names of God abundance and everything will come to you, right? Now, it's a different thing if an evil person has a lot of money, but they have it as a curse, not as a blessing. And if you believe that, you're wrong. And in a later life, you will understand it.
Raúl, to finish, I know you don't like to talk about the material world, about Malchut. But the people of Israel, the state of Israel, it's the same thing. The biblical people of Israel, the current state of Israel. Don't you see that there's a kind of confusion? With the whole Zionist conflict, with the whole Palestinian conflict, where many people are justifying real atrocities because it's written in the Torah. How would a Torah expert explain it? How would a Kabbalah expert explain it? Is the state of Israel the same as the people of Israel? No.
It's the same thing. The state of Israel is a political definition of a country that is in the Middle East and was created in 1948 by the Rothschild family. Is that clear? With what intention? In my opinion, with the intention of hijacking the spiritual concept of Israel and turning it into what is being done. That is atrocity after atrocity, Malchut level. What can that nation or other neighboring nations do? That is to be in a permanent state of chaotic conflict. A place linked to a lofty spiritual concept or to the concept itself. Israel in the Torah refers to a state of consciousness, not a country. Israel is what I have to aspire to. Coming from Egypt, from Malchut, in the symbol of leaving Egypt, pursued by the Egyptians, and reaching Israel by crossing the Red Sea, Israel. We can read it in Hebrew, permuting letters like Ayash Harel directly to him. It has nothing to do with a political state. It has nothing to do with a country. Israel is a state of consciousness. Period.
Incredible. End of physics in the spiritual writings, even in the gospel itself. The Quran. We're not just gonna get involved here with people. Don't you feel it, Raúl? They can take excerpts from those books, which I believe all hold great knowledge and wisdom, and interpret them in their own way to justify partisan and selfish actions on their part.
Absolutely. And that's dogmatism about the book. It's a form of dogmatism that, of course, I don't share. I mean, for me, the usefulness of a sacred book is what that sacred book is telling you about yourself, about you, and that's what's important to me. What does the Torah tell you about yourself? When you read that God created the heavens, the earth, and man in his image and likeness, what does that say about you? Or when it says to you, for example, Hashem Yelajem Lajem in Hebrew, which translates as, and God will fight for you and you will remain silent. Well, what does that say about you? How does that apply to your life? I mean, it's a practical book. It's not a book that should be taken literally, nor, of course, as a justification. Regarding phrases from the Torah or the Talmud, or on a literal level, I mean something that might seem outrageous, and then from there atrocious acts are justified, I don't approve of it in any way. For me, the key is, what does it teach you about yourself? What lesson is there for you? When studying the Torah, do it for yourself. What does it tell you about yourself?
I understand. And to finish, this is a question that just came to my mind. What difference do you make? What is the difference? Very relevant between the Gospels, between the Quran. I don't know what the Buddhist book is. Do they have a book?
Well, they must have one. They must have their book. No. I udemonog.
And the Torah, what's the main difference? You who are an expert in the Torah? For me, actually, in the
Deep down, there are similarities. And the thing is, their revealed books, the great revealed books, always bring a lot of truth. But I would tell you that in the Torah, the message is preserved with much more authenticity. It's becoming more original over time. And the Gospels are a development, a bit of a development of the Torah, also the New Testament. In fact, that's why it's called the New and the Old Testament. Yes,
the Torah is the old.
the Old.
The Torah is all the biblical books. No.
No, only the Pentateuch, only the Pentateuch, only the Pentateuch.
So Isaiah is not in there.
Yes. Well, those are already the prophets. That's what the Jews consider as the prophets. Okay, they have the prophets. They study them too. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Zechariah, obviously the major prophets, the minor prophets. Hosea.
Which are the major prophets?
The major prophets are Isaiah, Ezekiel, Zechariah, Jeremiah, and the minor prophets are Hosea. Joel, less known. The little books are shorter.
Samuel also has.
Samuel is one of the big ones, right? Yes.
All right. Hey, Raúl, it's been a huge pleasure. And honestly, I'm always happy to be with you, to share a space with you, and to learn a lot from you. And I want to tell the whole audience, folks, that if questions are asked that might seem tricky, or if questions are asked that might seem offensive, the intention is precisely to avoid a terrible reaction. What we're looking for is the truth. And in order to be able to think freely, one must risk being offensive. It's the only way. I'm going to leave you the link to my private community for the exclusive section with Raúl, which starts right now in the pinned comment. Anyone who wants to buy the Testosterone drink to boost testosterone has the link in the description. Raúl, do you want to say something to the audience before we go?
Well, nothing much. It's been a pleasure. That I'm always delighted by your invitation, that I feel comfortable, that I feel completely free to speak, and that's it. I'm delighted. And we'll wait for another occasion to keep enjoying these topics.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's all for today. See you in the next episode of La Factoria. Until next time.